I still remembered the exact vibration of my phone that night, the way the screen glowed against the dark living room. It was almost midnight in Phoenix, and the air felt heavier than usual. Ethan had already gone to bed hours earlier, as he always did, with that quiet, careful routine of a man trying not to disappoint anyone, least of all himself. I had stayed up, pretending to review the event schedule for the convention in Las Vegas, but truthfully, I just didn't want to climb into that bed again, not into that silence. The message came at 12:01, a single buzz, then another. I glanced down and froze. Just married my coworker, you're pathetic, by the way. For a second, I couldn't process it. The words didn't make sense together. Just married? Coworker? Pathetic? My first instinct was to laugh. Maybe it was some cruel joke from one of the girls at the conference. But then I saw the name. Alicia Romero, my own name, glowing on the sender field. I had sent it. The world spun for a moment before I realized what had happened. My drunken fingers, my own blurred anger had betrayed me. The message that was meant for him, the coworker I just married in a Vegas chapel after too many cocktails and too much resentment, had gone to Ethan instead. I waited for the next vibration, the explosion that would come. But when his reply arrived, it was only one word. Cool. That was Ethan. Minimalist even in heartbreak. I pictured him lying in our bed, staring at the phone with that same distant expression he'd worn for the last 2 years. The same years in which he had stopped reaching for me at night. The same years he had stopped being able to do so. He had once blamed the stress at work, then the medication, then the heat. Eventually, he stopped giving reasons. We stopped asking questions. We stopped touching. I had told myself for months that I was loyal, that love was more than flesh. But love without touch was a slow kind of starvation. And that week in Vegas, with the champagne, the compliments, the music, I had felt alive again, desired, seen. When I sent that text, I wanted to hurt him the way his silence had hurt me. But the moment his reply came, so calm, so indifferent, something inside me broke in half. Because his cool wasn't anger, it was defeat. And for the first time, I saw how small and tired he had become, how small we had become. Still, I didn't delete the message, I didn't call to explain, I just stared at the screen until the light dimmed, thinking about the man who used to hold me and whisper plans for the future. The same man who, 2 years earlier, had whispered apologies instead. That night, while the city of Vegas glittered outside the hotel window and the new husband snored beside me, I realized that betrayal wasn't the moment I cheated. It had started long before, in every night of silence, in every time Ethan avoided my eyes, in every pill bottle on his nightstand that promised to fix him but never did. And yet, even as the guilt crawled up my throat, I couldn't erase what I had done. The story had already begun. One text, one word, and one irreversible mistake. Before that message, our marriage had already been fading quietly for years. Not in fights or betrayals, but in long silences and careful routines. Ethan had been working from home since the pandemic, surrounded by glowing screens and lines of code. I used to joke that he spoke more to his laptop than to me. He would smile, a small, tired smile, and say, "At least my laptop doesn't argue." At first, his distance had seemed like stress. He had always been a perfectionist, and the new project had eaten his nights and weekends. But when I began to notice how he avoided touching me, even accidentally, I realized it wasn't only work. The first time it happened, or rather didn't happen, was on our anniversary. We had gone to a restaurant I loved. He had brought roses, even a small diamond bracelet. I had thought it meant something. That night when we got home, he had kissed me and I felt his hesitation. It was a soft, incomplete kiss, and when I reached for him, he froze. He whispered, "It's not you." Those 3 words became the new soundtrack of our life. He went to a doctor, reluctantly. Then came the prescriptions, the side effects, the excuses. At times, he would pretend to be asleep when I slipped into bed. Other times, he would offer back rubs or long hugs instead, small compensations for something larger that had vanished between us. I told myself it was temporary, that love was patient, that I could wait. But waiting became a habit, and patience became a kind of grief. I stopped buying lingerie. I stopped leaving the light on. Our daughter would go to school and we would pass each other in the hallway like polite roommates. There was no drama, no shouting, only the quiet erosion of everything that used to be alive. I remember the night I realized how bad it had become. I had returned late from an event, still in my red dress, hair loose, perfume lingering. Ethan was sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on the TV. I stood there, waiting for him to notice me. He didn't. I said, "Do you even see me anymore?" He looked up, half smiling, half tired. "Of course I do." But the way he said it made me feel invisible. That was when I started confiding in someone from work, Marcus. He was funny, confident, divorced. He listened when I spoke. It started with jokes in meetings, then dinners after long days, then texts at night. I told myself it was harmless, that I just needed to feel heard. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was craving the feeling of being wanted again. Ethan must have sensed it, in the way I began dressing differently or checking my phone too often. He didn't ask questions. Maybe he was afraid of the answers. He would leave small gifts on the table, flowers, chocolates, even a handwritten note once that said, "We'll be okay." But we weren't. His condition wasn't improving. The medication made him dizzy. The pressure made him withdraw further. He stopped touching me completely. It was as if intimacy had become a fragile glass he didn't dare to hold. When I lived for the Vegas convention, we didn't even hug goodbye. He just said, "Have a good trip," without looking up from his screen. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I deserved a few days to feel like someone again. I had no idea those few days would destroy everything we had left. If you've ever loved someone who slowly disappeared right beside you, not through death, but through distance, you know how cruel it can be. You stop recognizing the person you sleep next to. And the saddest part is realizing that you've both stopped trying to find each other again. In Las Vegas, everything looked brighter than it really was. The city had a way of disguising sadness behind flashing lights and polished smiles. I had organized dozens of events there before, but that week felt different. Maybe because I arrived with the heart already halfway gone. During the first night of the convention, Marcus and I walked through the hotel corridors after dinner. He made me laugh the way Ethan used to, back when our biggest problem was choosing a movie on Friday nights. Marcus touched my hand as we walked, and I didn't pull away. For the first time in years, someone looked at me as if I was worth looking at. I told myself it was harmless, a moment, a reminder that I still existed. The second night, after the gala dinner, I went to his room. I could say it was the champagne or the music or the loneliness, but that wouldn't be true. It was the accumulation of all the nights I had spent next to Ethan feeling unwanted. Every rejection had built a staircase, and that night, I finally climbed it. When Marcus kissed me, I didn't think about guilt. I thought about breath, about heat, about being alive. I remember closing my eyes and realizing how long it had been since I had felt someone's heartbeat against mine. It was as if my body had been asleep for years and suddenly woke up gasping for air. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and expected to see shame. But what I saw was something crueler: relief. It scared me, how easy it had been to cross that invisible line. I convinced myself that I deserved it, that I had given enough, waited enough, hoped enough, that fidelity had become meaningless when intimacy had already died. Back home, Ethan noticed the change in me. Maybe it was the way I smiled more, or the way I hummed in the kitchen again. He must have thought I was healing, that Vegas had done me good. In a way, it had. I began working harder, dressing better, cooking again. I acted like a woman who still had control of her life, while secretly building a world he couldn't enter. For months, I balanced two realities. By day, I was the devoted wife and mother. By night, the woman rediscovering passion in secret messages and hurried phone calls. Every time Ethan fell asleep early, I would sneak out to the balcony and text Marcus. We joked about everything, even the irony of my husband's silence. It was cruel, but cruelty felt like freedom. I told myself that what I was doing wasn't really betrayal because the marriage had already ended long before. I even tried to rationalize it, saying that Ethan's body had betrayed me first. It was the easiest lie to believe because it hurt less than admitting that I had simply stopped loving him. Sometimes Ethan would sit beside me on the couch and try to start a conversation about work or our daughter. I would smile, answer politely, and wait for it to end. I had learned to live in parallel lines, close enough to touch, but destined never to meet. Then came the night of the second Vegas trip. Marcus was going again. I told Ethan it was just another convention, the same as before. He nodded, pretending not to care. I think he wanted to trust me, even if something inside him already knew. He had always been good at pretending that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. That week, I felt untouchable. I thought I had everything under control. Marcus and I joked about getting married for fun, as a dare. We even took a picture in front of one of those quick chapels, laughing like teenagers. I never expected that laugh to become the sound of my life collapsing. It was supposed to be a private joke. It became a public confession. When I sent that message, I didn't realize I had pressed the wrong name. I didn't realize that in a single second, I had destroyed the illusion that had kept me safe for months. Ethan's reply, that one word, cool, was the quiet sound of something dying for good. I used to believe that love died in shouting matches and slammed doors, but sometimes it dies in silence, in one-word messages, in the space between two people who stopped fighting because they stopped caring. The morning after that message, the world moved as if nothing had changed. Flights landed, coffee brewed, badges scanned at the ballroom doors. Inside me, everything had already collapsed. I moved through the convention pretending I was fine, answering emails, checking stage cues, smiling at executives whose names I had memorized years ago. I avoided Marcus's eyes because if I met them, I might run, and running would only make noise. Ethan did not call. He did not send another text. That silence felt louder than fury. By early afternoon, I opened our bank app out of habit. the same way I always checked budgets on event weeks. A pending charge from the Vegas chapel showed on my card, a careless souvenir of a joke that had not been a joke at all. I swallowed hard and put my phone away. A moment later, my ring finger felt strangely naked. I remembered where I had left my wedding band the night before, face down on the hotel duvet like a coin I refused to carry. When the gala began, the ballroom lights dimmed to that warm gold I loved. I stood by the tech table reading off the run of show. The choir came in, the presenter thanked our sponsors, the screens flashed our company logo. I had staged hundreds of moments like that. The irony haunted me. I was the woman who curated perfect nights for other people while my own marriage died in the background. During the dessert course, a message popped on my phone from our internal chat channel. Someone had tagged my name under a thread titled "Memories from Last Night." A thumbnail showed a photo of the chapel neon and a blurry shape of two people laughing under a plastic bouquet. My stomach tightened. I tapped it and saw the worst version of an accident. The camera phone had captured me and Marcus outside the chapel, both of us grinning like we had outsmarted life. Below it, there was another attachment, a screenshot of my own text that read, "Just married my coworker. You're pathetic, BTW." One of the assistants had thought it was hilarious and had dragged it from our private message into a group chat, assuming it was a joke. The thread had already lit with laughing emojis. I looked up and felt the room tilt. I closed the app and walked to the service corridor, where the air smelled of coffee and carpet cleaner. I stood there breathing like a swimmer, waiting for a wave to pass. In that narrow hallway, the truth came into focus. It would not be a private mess anymore. It was becoming a spectacle. When I returned to the ballroom, Marcus touched my elbow and asked if I was okay. I told him, "Not here." He nodded and stepped back. I could not tell if he was scared for me or for himself. On the flight home the next morning, I stared at the wing and rehearsed a version of the truth that sounded less cruel. I never settled on one. I landed in Phoenix at 7 in the evening and drove straight home. The house lights were on. Through the window, I saw Ethan at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, something he rarely handled manually. When I walked in, he looked up and said hi, like any other night. His voice was steady. That steadiness frightened me more than shouting. He had laid out receipts, printouts of calendar entries, and a small burgundy folder. The folder was from the urologist we had visited once, back when we were still saying we would fix it together. He had reopened that file. A prescription coupon sat on top, uncut. He had printed an email thread from our pharmacy about options after insurance declined one of the newer medications. He had also printed the message I sent from Vegas, the words sitting there in black and white. He did not push the papers toward me. He did not interrogate. He just said he had wanted to understand where the line had been crossed. I told him it had not been one night or one text. It had been the 2 years we stopped touching and pretended that counted as love. He kept his eyes on the table and listened. When I finished, he asked whether I had loved Marcus. I said no, and realized it was true. I had loved the version of myself who still felt wanted. That version had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with the emptiness I had carried for too long. He nodded and said he had tried. He told me that the week before my trip, he had picked up a new prescription and had bought candles like the ones we used to light years ago. He had planned the quiet dinner for us after I returned. He had wanted to try again. He looked at the candles still in the shopping bag by the pantry and gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. It sounded like apology and defeat at once. Later that night, as I unpacked, I found my dress from the gala and the little white envelope from the chapel. I slid the envelope into the trash. The dress I hung carefully back in the closet. My ring was still missing. I checked my toiletry bag and the pockets of my blazer. Nothing. In the middle of the search, I saw a notification from HR asking me to confirm images posted to the internal chat. The thread had traveled fast. I felt the burn of shame travel even faster. In bed, Ethan lay on his side, awake. We had been facing opposite walls for months, but that night the distance felt measured. I told him I had left my ring in the hotel. He said he knew. He had seen the photo. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet calculation of consequences. The day later, our daughter noticed the missing ring and asked whether I had taken it off for the event. I said yes. I heard my own voice softened into a register I reserved for fragile stories. Ethan stayed quiet and handed her lunch money. We performed a normal day inside a house that no longer had a normal access. The escalation did not stop at home. A colleague called to ask if everything was all right. Another text came from a friend who had seen the chat. Gossip moved like electricity. I answered as little as possible. The more questions arrived, the more I understood that my private hunger had become public content. I had always believed that Ethan's problem lived in the bedroom only, a closed door we could hide behind. But the dysfunction had seeped into everything. It had shaped the way we scheduled our days, the way we avoided vacations that required shared beds in small hotel rooms, the way I chose dresses that were easier to take off and then never did. It had taught me to translate tenderness into chores and jokes. Now, the same problem had created the strangest symmetry. The absence that had starved me also protected him from suspicion. No one expected a woman to cheat when her husband was the one most people would pity. That was the truth that kept me awake. The definitive clue came the following afternoon when Ethan forwarded me an email from IT. The company had archived the chat thread, and a compliance officer had asked me to confirm whether the images depicted a personal ceremony during a work trip. My finger hovered over reply. I imagined my daughter reading a headline one day or seeing a screenshot on a friend's phone. I imagined my mother's face. I closed the laptop and finally cried. The irony kept circling back. Ethan had dragged out the old medical folder because he had been ready to try again, to bring back something resembling intimacy. He had gathered data the way he gathered code, convinced that a precise sequence might fix the system. He had been preparing a better night for us, while I had been preparing a better excuse for myself. The proof that exposed me had not come from a private detective or a misplaced receipt. It had come from an echo of my own message, multiplied by a corporate channel I managed daily. The same tools I used to organize other people's celebrations had documented the end of mine. That evening, I placed my phone face down and sat beside Ethan on the couch. We watched the news without listening. A commercial for a weekend getaway flashed on the screen. A couple in soft light laughed and kissed on a balcony that looked suspiciously like my Vegas hotel. I reached for the remote and lowered the volume. He asked whether we were going to tell our daughter. I said, not yet. He nodded and said, all right. Then he asked a question he had never asked in 2 years. He asked whether I had been lonely. I said yes. It was the only word that felt honest enough to hold the weight of everything I had done. The escalation was not a single dramatic explosion. It was a steady rise in clarity. Each clue stitched the story into something undeniable. The missing ring, the charge from the chapel, the photo in the chat, the printed medical notes on the kitchen table, the candles in the pantry bag. The truth had always been a collection of small objects waiting to be arranged in the right light. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of standing under the ballroom truss while the lights focused on an empty stage. The headset crackled. Someone asked if we were ready to roll. I said, almost. Then I looked down and realized I had been holding both a bouquet and a folder labeled treatment options. In the dream, I understood the message. Love and repair had arrived at the same hour, just not for the same people. The next day would move us toward the moment neither of us could avoid anymore. The confrontation was already writing itself, and it would not stay private much longer.
The confrontation did not arrive through shouting or chaos. It came quietly, as if the air itself decided to stop pretending. 2 days after I returned from Vegas, Ethan asked me to have dinner with him at the small Italian place where we used to celebrate birthdays. I knew that invitation carried weight. He had not asked me out in over a year. I said yes, even though every cell in my body trembled. The restaurant was almost empty. Candlelight flickered against the dark wood tables. Ethan had already ordered a bottle of the same wine we used to drink when we were first dating. He was trying to recreate something, a setting, a memory, maybe even hope. For a moment, I thought about walking out before the truth could surface, but he looked at me, and I stayed. He asked if I wanted to explain. His voice was steady, too calm for the storm I had expected. I began to talk, but the words tangled inside me. I said it had been a mistake. He smiled, but not kindly. He said, "A mistake is forgetting to close the garage door, not marrying someone else." The table between us felt wider than it was. I looked down, unable to hold his gaze. He told me he had seen everything, the photos, the chat, the thread. He said even his coworkers had heard the rumor. He spoke slowly, as if each word needed to be placed carefully to avoid breaking. He said he did not blame Marcus. He blamed the silence that had lived between us, the silence he had helped create. He said he had been a coward, hiding behind his pills, his anxiety, and his code. He admitted that his body had failed him, but that it had not been the only thing that stopped working. I began to cry. Not the delicate kind of crying that wins sympathy, but the shaking kind that makes people look away. He let me finish before he asked a single question that cut through me. "When you called me pathetic, was it because of the messages or because of the nights I couldn't?" I wanted to tell him it was just a word, that I had been drunk, angry, humiliated, but I knew the truth. It had been about the nights when I waited for him to reach for me and he didn't, the nights when I started to believe I was the only one still breathing inside that bed. He nodded slowly, eyes wet but calm. He said, "I know what it did to you. I saw it, I felt it. I tried to fix it and I couldn't." Then he said something I never expected. He said, "I was afraid of you, not of losing you, of facing you. Because every time I failed, I saw the disappointment in your face and it made me smaller." He said it had taken away every piece of confidence he had left. And when he said that, I understood that both of us had been living under the same humiliation, only on opposite sides of the bed. The waiter arrived with our food and neither of us touched it. Ethan kept speaking, almost whispering. He said the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was knowing that the world now knew why it had happened. That people would connect the dots and see him as less of a man. He said the rumor was already spreading through our social circle, through the company. The story of the wife who cheated because her husband couldn't perform had become office gossip. His voice cracked once, and that single break in his composure was worse than any anger could have been. I tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled it away gently. He said, "Not now." Then he asked for the check. Outside, the night was warm and still. The sound of traffic felt distant. Ethan stopped by the car and turned toward me. He said he had thought about leaving, about disappearing for a while. But then he realized running would only confirm what people already thought. He said he was going to face it. Then he told me something I would never forget. He said, "You took my dignity in public, but I lost it long before that, quietly, every time I avoided you. Now I need to find it again." When we got home, our daughter was asleep. He went straight to the guest room. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. There was a note on the counter that said he was taking a few days off to clear his head. I felt relief and despair at the same time. The house felt too quiet, like it had been emptied of air. 2 days later, I went to work and everyone pretended nothing had happened, but I could feel the stares, the half-sympathetic smiles. The worst was during a meeting when one of the executives made a joke about Vegas weddings. A few people laughed. I didn't. The sound of their laughter hit me like a slap. For the first time, I felt what Ethan must have felt for years. The humiliation of being seen through pity. That evening, I received a message from him. It said simply, "I'll come by tomorrow to talk." The next day he arrived, calm, almost peaceful. He didn't come to fight. He came to tell me he was filing for separation. His voice didn't shake, mine did. He said he didn't hate me. He said he hoped I found whatever it was I had been looking for. And then he thanked me. He said, "Thank you for finally forcing me to confront myself." That night, after he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. The humiliation had changed shape. It was no longer his problem or mine. It had become a shared wound, a mirror reflecting how two people could break each other in silence. If you believe Ethan deserved what happened, or if you think no one should be judged without knowing both sides, let me know by liking this video. Sometimes a simple gesture tells me you understand the pain hidden behind stories like ours.
I spent the next morning rehearsing explanations that sounded less cruel than the truth. None of them survived contact with memory. Everything I wanted to say circled back to the same place, to a bed that had turned into a quiet battlefield where both of us had retreated. When Ethan arrived that afternoon, he looked rested in a way I had not seen in months. He asked if we could talk at the park down the street. I agreed because the house felt loaded with ghosts. We sat on a bench near the basketball court. Kids shouted in the distance, and a dog tugged at its leash like it believed the whole world was waiting for it. I started first. I said I was sorry. I said it with both hands around a paper cup, as if heat could carry sincerity. He listened and nodded, and then he asked me to tell the story the way I remembered it, not the way I wished it had happened. I tried. I spoke about the first failed night on our anniversary, about the apologetic smiles, about the pharmacy printouts that ended stuffed inside a drawer. I said I had waited. I said I had tried to be patient. I said I had swallowed loneliness until it felt normal. He kept quiet until I reached the park where I said I had justified what I did because intimacy had already died. That was when he asked if I heard myself. He said I had used a medical condition as permission to cross a line. He said I had turned his body into an excuse. The words stung because they were fair. I wanted to argue, to say I had been starving for affection, that a marriage without touch was a form of abandonment. He said he knew. He said he had felt abandoned inside his own body long before I felt abandoned inside the marriage. He told me something he had never said directly. He said the first time it failed, he had panicked and swallowed that panic because he thought it would pass. The second time, he had watched my face for the exact second disappointment appeared and tried to joke before it did. The third time, he had felt so ashamed that he planned every evening around avoiding the possibility of another failure. He said he had become an expert in routes around his own wife, movie nights that ended just late enough, dishes that took just long enough, a shower that ran just a bit longer so the moment would dissolve. He said avoidance became a map that guided his entire life, and that map had no road back. I told him he could have taken my hand and said, "I am scared." He said he had tried once, and I had cried so hard he did not know if I was crying for us or against him. He said he had wanted to be a husband who reached for his wife, not a patient reporting symptoms. He said he had taken the pills and hated the way they turned his chest into a drum. He said he had considered therapy, but could not bear the idea of explaining what his body would not do to a stranger with a clipboard. He said he had failed me, and then he said I had failed him too. Not by cheating first, but by letting resentment replace curiosity, by counting nights like offenses, by making a private struggle feel like a verdict on his worth. I reacted the way a cornered person reacts. I defended. I listed anniversaries and weekends and trips canceled because the hotel beds felt like stages. I said I had stopped buying dresses because I could not stand the ritual of undressing for nothing. I said I had asked and finally stopped asking because the question had become humiliating. My voice rose and then broke. He let the quiet settle and then asked one question. If I had been the one whose body stopped working for reasons I could not control, would I have wanted him to find comfort in someone else? The answer crushed my chest because I knew it. I said no. He nodded and said that was the point. Not that my pain was smaller than his, but that both pains had asked for care and we had offered each other punishment disguised as logic. He said he had hidden behind code and I had hidden behind righteousness. He said both hides looked like courage from the outside and felt like cowardice on the inside. When we walked back, the sun was low and the street smelled like cut grass. At the door, he turned and asked if I had loved him during those months. I said I had carried love like a habit. It had been there in the lunches packed, in the bills paid, in the reminders to schedule dentist appointments. But the kind of love that turns a face upward in the dark had gone quiet. He said that was the love he missed, the one that made life feel bright even on dull days. He said the absence had owned the house. We agreed to tell our daughter a version that protected her. We agreed to begin the paperwork without cruelty. He left and I stood in the kitchen watching ice melt in a glass. The quiet pressed against my back. I walked to the bedroom and opened the nightstand where the urologist folder had slept for months. Inside, I found another note I had forgotten. Ethan had written me a letter months earlier, a small card tucked between pamphlets. He had written that he was sorry and that he would try again and that he wanted to learn how to hold me without fear. I realized I had never answered. The guilt settled like a stone I could not move. That evening, Marcus called. I let it ring and then sent a short message that said I needed to end it. He replied with confusion, and then with irritation, and finally with resignation. The silence that followed felt necessary like sutures after a long surgery. I understood then that my affair had not been about him at all. It had been about building a room where the rules did not apply, because reality had felt unbearable. That room was gone. Reality remained. The following day, HR scheduled a meeting to discuss the Vegas incident. I prepared a statement that acknowledged misconduct and accepted the consequences. On the way to the office, I stopped at a jewelry store to ask whether they could recreate my ring. The clerk asks if it had sentimental value. I said it had a history that needed an end. She smiled the way strangers do when they hear a story they will never know. At home, I gathered Ethan's candles from the pantry bag and placed them on the counter. The wicks were clean and white. I imagined the night he had planned for us, the courage it had taken to plan it, the time he had chosen. He believed that a precise combination of care and medicine and light might restore something inside him and inside us. I had been in a different city with a different man, pretending that vows meant nothing when biology raised a wall. The contrast burned. That evening we spoke again, one final conversation before lawyers and logistics replaced intimacy and memory. He told me he could forgive the act eventually, but he could not live under the shadow of public humiliation. I told him I understood. He said forgiveness and staying were different verbs. He said he would choose the first and decline the second. His calm made space in the room for a grief that felt older than both of us. I went to bed early and lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan.
I remembered the first apartment we had shared, the way the cheap blinds rattled in the wind, the way we had once grabbed each other like the world could end and we would still be laughing. I remembered the middle years, when work settled like dust on everything and we stopped collecting firsts. I remembered the recent years, when we measured nights by how carefully we avoided the subject that owned the house. Every memory had a body in it, even the ones about money and travel and chores. Bodies hold love and ruin the same way, quietly at first. Then, all at once.
It was a Sunday morning when the final proof appeared, disguised as routine. Ethan had stopped by to pick up some boxes from the garage. Our daughter was at a friend's house, and the quiet between us felt polite, almost neutral. He looked thinner, calmer. I offered coffee, and he accepted. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we had once eaten birthday cakes and made lists of vacation plans we never took. He glanced toward the counter where I had left the candles he had bought months earlier. The label was still attached. He smiled faintly and said, "Those were supposed to be for our dinner that night." I said I knew. I told him I had found them and felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. He nodded and said, "Maybe they do." Then he reached into his bag and placed his phone on the table. He said he wanted to show me something, not to hurt me, but to understand how everything had unfolded. He opened a folder of screenshots, the ones the HR department had sent him during their internal investigation. Among the photos was the chapel picture, another of me laughing with Marcus, and a short video clip from the hotel's social feed, apparently recorded by a guest. The irony was unbearable. The hotel where I had organized countless corporate events had shared a promotional video featuring a spontaneous Vegas wedding. I had become an accidental face in the background, bouquet in hand, laughing under neon lights. It was only a few seconds, but it had already been viewed thousands of times. He tapped pause, and my frozen image smiled back at both of us. I wanted to disappear. He said quietly, "It's strange, isn't it? You spent years trying to feel seen, and this is what being seen looks like." That sentence cut deeper than anger. I felt my throat tighten. I asked if he hated me. He said no. He said hate required energy he no longer had. Then he said something else, something I hadn't expected. He said the humiliation had finally cured his denial. That watching that clip, facing the gossip, reading the comments, had stripped away every layer of pride he had left. It was the worst pain he had felt, but it had also forced him to confront what he had avoided for years. He said he had gone back to the doctor, but this time he had gone alone, not out of guilt but out of determination. The doctor had told him that most of his problem had been psychological, worsened by medication and shame. He had started therapy, he had stopped hiding, and slowly things had begun to work again. I didn't know whether to cry or smile. I felt proud and small at the same time. The same weakness that had broken us was now becoming the reason for his strength. It was the purest irony I could imagine. The very dysfunction that had driven me to betrayal had forced him into healing. He stood up, ready to leave, but before he did, he said one last thing. He said, "You know what's strange? I don't even blame you anymore. You broke me, but maybe that's the only way I could rebuild." Then he picked up the candles and added, "I think I'll keep these. Maybe someday I'll use them." When he walked out, I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark coffee. That clip kept looping in my head. My laugh, my bouquet, the lights. It all looked so alive, and yet I knew that moment had been the start of everything dying. The proof of betrayal had traveled across the world before I even had time to regret it. The same technology that had captured Ethan's failures in silence had captured mine in neon lights. Later that night, I opened my laptop and watched the clip again. For the first time, I saw what he had seen. Not a woman celebrating freedom, but a woman running from herself. Every frame carried the same truth. Desire without connection is just another form of loneliness. If you were in Ethan's place watching that video,
Would you have forgiven me? Or would you have walked away like he did? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Sometimes knowing what others think helps us see the weight of our own choices.
2 months passed after that Sunday morning. By then, the scandal had dissolved into smaller circles of gossip, and life had taken on a new rhythm. I had moved to a smaller apartment across town, one with a quiet view of the desert hills. Ethan had stayed in the house, mostly for our daughter's stability. We spoke rarely but cordially, and when we did, I could tell something in him had changed. Not the bitterness I had expected, but a new steadiness, like a man who had stopped fighting against himself. One afternoon, while dropping off some documents, I saw him again. He looked different. His posture, his tone, even his eyes. The fragile tension that used to surround him had disappeared. He told me he had started running every morning. He had also changed his diet, gone off one of the medications, and started working with a new therapist who specialized in psychosomatic disorders. But there was more. There was something alive in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. He said, almost casually, that he had found something that helped him, something natural, simple. I raised an eyebrow. He laughed and said, "No, it's not what you think." Then he explained that during one of those late-night searches for information, he had come across an article by a doctor named Jerry Burroughs, a specialist who talked about restoring male vitality through natural compounds. Ethan had been skeptical at first, but desperation has a way of turning doubt into curiosity. He said the method was called masculinity coffee, a combination of 3 everyday household ingredients that, when taken consistently, help restore blood flow, hormone balance, and confidence. He didn't reveal the ingredients. He only said that within a week, he started feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not just physically, but mentally. He said, "It's like waking up from a long sleep." I could hear the quiet pride in his voice. He told me he had followed the instructions religiously, not because he believed in miracles, but because he wanted to believe in himself again. Over the next weeks, his transformation became undeniable. His skin looked healthier, his shoulders straighter, his words more certain. He even began seeing someone new, a woman from his therapy group. Her name was Melissa. When he mentioned her, I felt a small ache, but it was gentle, like a healed scar that still remembers where it came from. He said Melissa made him laugh again. He said he didn't think about failure anymore. I smiled and told him I was glad, because I truly was. Ethan had become the man I always hoped he could be, but not for me, for himself. That was his redemption, and strangely, mine too. Because seeing him healed meant that my betrayal hadn't destroyed him. It had forced him to confront what he had buried. Maybe we had both needed to break to understand what was worth fixing. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. He said, "You know, Alicia, if I had found that coffee sooner, maybe none of this would have happened." But then he added, maybe it had to happen so we could both stop pretending. I watched him walk away, calm and confident, the same man who had once replied, "Cool," to a message that ended our marriage, now walking toward a life he had built from the ashes of that word. For a long time, I sat there in silence, thinking about how strange redemption looks when it finally arrives. It doesn't come with forgiveness or romance. It comes quietly, through the courage to start again. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this. Because if you're wondering how Ethan discovered exactly what those 3 mysterious ingredients were, the ones that changed his life completely, I'll tell you. Look in the pinned comment of this video. There's a direct link with Dr. Jerry Burroughs' full information about the masculinity coffee. But don't wait too long, because this information could be taken down at any moment. I've seen it happen before, and I wouldn't want you to lose the chance to read it while it's still available. Anyway, Ethan's story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in renewal. The man who once hid from me now wakes up every day ready for the world.
And I, the woman who once thought she was alive only when desired, finally learned that peace doesn't come from being wanted. It comes from understanding why you wanted it so badly in the first place. He had been impotent in more ways than one, until he learned that even broken men could rise again.